Future Factory 2021 si pone l'obiettivo di guardare al contesto globale in trasformazione, sia come naturale evoluzione delle dinamiche di cambiamento che valevano anche fino al 2019, ma anche nell'ottica degli scenari post-Covid che forse hanno cambiato le cose, ma più probabilmente hanno svolto il ruolo di catalizzatori, quindi hanno accelerato dei meccanismi e delle dinamiche che già erano partiti, già erano evidenti agli osservatori. Quindi gli assetti stanno cambiando, per questo Future Factory è fatto di due aspetti. Uno, come abbiamo visto in questo caso particolare, e poi lo vedremo nel corso della giornata, è l'ascolto e il racconto delle esperienze singole delle aziende che stanno affrontando questi cambiamenti singolarmente e insieme, lo vedremo fra poco, e poi ci sono invece dei punti di vista più di sistema, più generali, che ci aiutano a capire come si stia muovendo il contesto nel quale le aziende rappresentate da Acimga si muovono. E il prossimo intervento è proprio uno di questi interventi di contesto. Lui è Distinguished Visiting Professor della Bologna Business School, è stato Senior Fellow alla Johns Hopkins University di Baltimore e anche alla Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. È stato durante l'amministrazione Obama consulente senior per l'innovazione della Segreteria di Stato e coordinatore del Technology and Media Policy Committee sempre nella campagna presidenziale di Obama 2008. Let me welcome Alec Ross. Welcome, Professor Ross. I can't see you at the moment, but I think
Mi vedete?
Sì, sì.
Mi sentite? Oh, eccomi.
Sì, tutto bene?
Sì, tutto bene. Buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Buon pomeriggio, Alec Ross. Shall we do this in English, maybe? Yes?
Sure, we'll do it. Sì, solo che vi chiedo scusa per l'eventuale errore con la lingua inglese. No, scherzo, sì, lo facciamo in inglese.
If you want to put some Italian, se vuole mettere un po' di italiano, you can. Do whatever you want. But let's do it in English to make the translator's job easier. What do you think will be the impact of digitization in manufacturing in Italy and Europe over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I think that the next 5 years are going to see a remarkable acceleration in digitization, more than what we anticipated. Adesso abbiamo verso 35 miliardi di connessioni a rete, 35 billion connected devices to the internet broadly. These are our smartphones, these are the laptops that I'm speaking to you over, but more importantly as it relates to manufacturing, these are the sensors in our supply chains. So right now, it's September 2021. September 2025, so just 4 years from now, that number will have grown from 35 billion to 75 billion. So the slope in the graph of digitization is fairly remarkable. And it's not because we're putting more telephones in our pockets. It's because we are running the zeros and ones of computer code into our supply chains and through our manufacturing processes. So what does this mean? What this means is that the internet, digitization, that which we know has transformed industries from like journalism and advertising and things rooted in information communication services, over the next 5 years, what we're building is an industrial internet. So in the same way in which advertising and journalism have been changed, over the next 5 years, I think the field that's going to be most transformed is manufacturing. The interesting thing, though, from my perspective, is that unlike advertising and journalism, for example, which lent itself to a lot of little startups coming in and taking over everything, you have to have deep domain expertise in manufacturing to be able to build an effective business there. So what I believe is that the innovation as a byproduct of digitization that is going to come largely come from within the existing manufacturing sector. And I could speak at great length, but just one other point I will make is I actually feel sono molto ottimista per l'Italia in questo senso. I'm very optimistic because if you think about the last wave of digitization, Italy oftentimes suffered because it has a very high cost labor base. And so if you could send something to Eastern Europe, if you could send something to India, where it could be manufactured at a lower unit labor cost, you would. However, the difference now is that a lot of the manufacturing that is going to be most enabled by the application of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics is actually going to require a fairly high level of education and human capital. And we know that we have a concentration of this in Italy. So in this respect, I think the fact that we are very good at what we do in Italy, that we have deep domain expertise, even if what we produce is not the lowest cost, I believe will actually position us relatively well versus Eastern Europe versus lower cost labor markets.
So you're being optimistic, which is great. But let's see if you can be optimistic about the AI. Everybody's scared about the AI. Everybody's worried about the use of AI. What do you foresee in terms of the utilization of AI in manufacturing?
So artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics are going to have a huge impact in manufacturing. But I think that a lot of the journalism written in this area is lazy, and it's not accurate. We are going to see this, the principal substitution we are going to see in labor enabled by AI is increasingly going to, has already substituted labor that is manual and routine. And what it's replacing now is labor that is increasingly cognitive and non-routine. So it's already the case, if you are a manufacturer in Italy, most of you do not employ many people based on how strong their shoulders are, how much of something you can carry. You already have machinery that does that. What's going to happen now as the systems grow increasingly intelligent? The evidence is that it will not reduce the total number of jobs. What it will do is it will change the nature of the jobs for which that are available. So for example, in the United States, there's a big worry that by 2028, we will have 750,000 jobs that will not get filled in manufacturing, not because there aren't people who want to work in manufacturing, but because they don't have the requisite skills. What we're seeing is what AI is doing is it's changing the nature of the factory worker. There's sort of a binary in manufacturing. Either you are telling a machine what to do, or a machine is telling you what to do. In a world where a machine is telling you what to do, those jobs are going to be found in Mexico. They're going to be found in India. They're going to be found in lower cost Eastern European markets. What we really need in Italy is to make sure that we are making the necessary investments in education and in skills training so that we have the workers who can be those who tell the machines what to do. And that is relevant both within the context of local production, but also in the context of the globalization of our manufacturing and printing processes globally.
Can you give us an example of a traditional family-owned Italian manufacturer that has moved into the cutting edge of technology seamlessly or with ease, with success?
Sì, infatti ci sono tanti esempi e vi darò uno, ok? Allora voi tutti sapete i vaccini. Scusa, torno in inglese. You all know the examples of the Pfizer vaccines and the little bottles. Do you know what I mean when I say the little bottles that hold the Pfizer vaccines? You all see that in the news. What most people don't know is that all of the billions of those bottles used all over the world are produced 45 minutes from Bologna by a manufacturing company called Marchesini. Marchesini is owned by a family. It's owned by the Marchesini family. It's multi-generational. It was started by, 3 generations ago. And now they are doing, quite possibly, the most important manufacturing work in the world, creating containers for vaccines, which have what we call 6 nines of effectiveness, 99.9999% of safety rate. This is something you're not going to produce in China. This is something you're not going to produce in Pakistan. You want to produce it in Emilia-Romagna. You want to produce it in places in Italy with very high levels of quality. And so Marchesini, this very nice family, when you walk into one of their factories, it's like walking into one of those movies from the 1970s or 80s of science fiction. And let me explain. So what they have is they have artificial intelligence enabled 3D printing, utilizing lasers, producing all of their packaging materials, and doing so at enormous scale. And there was one point during the hard lockdown where the workers couldn't go, into the office. And you say, well, my goodness, how can workers at a place where we're producing the containers vaccines not go to work? You know, questa è la fine del mondo, eh? Well, you know what they did? They were able to work from home, and the operai, the workers, were literally, over the laptop, able to direct the machines using AI. And so the machines were working 24 hours a day with workers not in the factories. And it was enabled by digitization, by people working from home, controlling the robots, enabled by artificial intelligence. And that's why we have billions of containers for the Pfizer vaccine. And this is why we're able to produce it in Emilia-Romagna, as opposed to a lower cost labor market. That's one example. There are other examples, again, of these family-owned manufacturing. Biopharma, I'm thinking of now in Friuli. What it all is about these families that are medium-sized. Maybe they produce tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenues. They aren't the biggest. What they have is a willingness to make the investments, both in the equipment, but then in the skills of their workers. And so, for example, I'm a teacher at Bologna Business School, at the Business School of the University of Bologna. And every year, Marchesini, this little family-owned manufacturer, sends about 12 or 15 of its employees into the university to get continual education. And so what's interesting is you might say, well, that's very expensive. Sure, it's expensive, but guess what happened when Pfizer needed to produce billions of containers? They went to Marchesini, and the revenues of Marchesini shooting straight up, hundreds of millions of euros in additional revenue. And so there are very good examples that we can find from throughout Italy. Most of what I'm seeing, the concentration of a lot of the best things that I'm seeing are in Lombardia, in Emilia-Romagna, and then some in the Northeast, in Friuli, Giulia Venezia. And I know there are other examples of it, but that's where I'm seeing a lot of it.
Since we're talking about the human side of production and innovation, there's an upcoming book of yours, I furiosi anni '20, where you talk about the social contract. What role should our companies play in helping this social contract strong and ensuring the way of life which we cherish so much in Italy when everything works and when everything is successful?
Allora, noi abbiamo un contratto sociale che secondo me funziona abbastanza bene in Italia e non vogliamo il modello dei ragazzi di California, non abbiamo voglia del modello americano e non possiamo vogliere il modello cinese. We need to have an Italian model. And what do I mean by that? An Italian model for growth and governance. So instead of the ruthless shareholder capitalism dei miliardi di California, where if things go down for 1 second, you fire the employee. And all of the economic benefit goes to the 1%, all'1%. Then there's the Chinese model, which is deeply hierarchical and authoritarian. If I'm Italian, I don't want the ruthless shareholder capitalism model of the Americans, and I don't want the authoritarian model of the Chinese. I want an Italian model. And so what is the Italian model? The Italian model is one where there is a commitment that crosses employer capital, employee labor, customers, suppliers, in un equilibrio, so that we can get the necessary return on capital. But with the workers, there is a more cooperative environment. And if I were to be critical for a second, amo l'Italia, un cuore italiano, un'anima italiano. But if I were to be a bit critical of Italy for a second, I do think that there's oftentimes, and throughout Mediterranean states, there's two antagonistic relationship between the unions and the owners of capital. And I do think that we would benefit from looking to the north of Europe, to the Scandinavian countries. I sit on the board of directors of a publicly traded Swiss company, and we have a different rapport with capital. And so I do, and this is not universally true, but I do think, and I put most of the blame on the unions, I'm just going to be very honest. I think the unions need to play a more productive role engaging with ownership so that ownership and labor can develop models that are competitive in the global context. And if you do that, then the kind of investment that a lot of these businesses make to their communities and to their places can be sustained and can be competitive against the Germans. It can be competitive against the Americans, and it can be competitive against the Chinese.
Wow, thank you. All of a sudden I'm more optimistic than I already was. Grazie mille a Alec Ross, anche per il suo evidente amore per il nostro paese. Thank you very much indeed.
Grazie a tutti voi.